I've been having a bit of a problem. I would look for a full screen explosion build, I would watch the video, and then the whole screen isn't exploding. Now, I understand hyperbole is a literary device, but this still bothered me, and I felt like I needed to fix it. So here is the Invoker Monk Basic Attack Herald Detonator build. Now, you might be asking yourself, why Basic Attack? And on some level, I'm also still asking myself that. But really, it doesn't need me to sell it that hard. It's free, it doesn't move you unintentionally into on-screen death effects. It frees up a skill slot for the many auras we need. It's really all positive for me. For most people, I would say the drawbacks are the short range, and basic attack might not just be a very interesting concept to build around. It detonates the heralds just fine though, and it does alright for bossing. It's not that much different than your average monk strike skill. They both excel at mapping, but the key difference here is that there is no weaker initial hits leading up to a combo finale, so you are more often getting these immediate pack shatters on your first tap, and it feels generally just better to me with less investment. This is the tree, which is a bit of a mess, and will probably stay that way until Path of Building is out, and it can be tested a bit more easily. Right now, it is focused mostly on generic damage increases and increasing freeze rate to get bosses frozen. Also, getting enough dex to run high-level Herald of Thunder and a full evasion body armor, both of the requirements for which can get quite high, I think close to 200 for Herald of Thunder, and my current body armor requires 157 for evasion, and that really requires either stats on gear or a little extra in the tree. And these nodes are great for that. This right here is Controlled Metamorphosis, which is tech I tried to pick up from Snoobe85, but his tree saves him more points, and I don't see the value here as much. So I would not recommend this. I would just take Falcon technique here to take advantage of the moderate deck stacking we're doing to hit requirements, and these generic damage nodes are great. This other stuff is not really necessary. I haven't really felt the speed increase, and this can get quite expensive if you don't want a big res penalty on it. The quarterstaff nodes are good. You get extra dex. This right here does not seem to help much because charge staff has a limit on the power charges it will count, so it stops benefiting you very quickly. Jewels are not super focused on any one thing, but area of effect will help herald chains the most, and you can get quite a lot of damage on jewels too. Rage is not as important as it could be because we are often shattering whole packs. It is not going to have time to build, and on bosses, just having one rage is nice, and I would recommend that at least. Life and mana on kill are also nice to have early. You don't need it as much with using basic attack, but it can still be nice to have. And this one also has area of effect, so it seems like a good all-rounder. The Resonance Keystone helps generate power charges for charged staff through Combat Frenzy. Lucidity is a great defensive layer. 16% reduced damage, essentially, as long as you have mana, and that helps shore up defenses in maps that lower your res, and for mods and Ultimatum that lower your res, this can be a great mitigation tool. These nodes give big damage boosts to frozen enemies. Extra power charges for charge staff are nice, and also you get critical damage bonus directly after using charge staff, which can be noticeable at times. Helpful for the generic damage boosts are these critical nodes that give damage based on recent critical strikes. It is quite a lot. There is just 100, there's a little over 100 right here, percent damage. And you get that almost all the time because you will almost always have dealt a critical strike in the past 4 or 8 seconds. Because it is actually different here for 8 seconds and recently, which is 4 seconds for some reason. Bestial Skin helps to double the res on, double the evasion on body armor and is quite nice. Subterfuge Mask is great once you have a nice energy shield helmet to use it with. Our ascendancies are Lead Me Through Grace and Protect Me from Harm. Protect Me from Harm gives armor based on evasion rating at a slight penalty. It's very manageable and the armor is very noticeable for mapping. The extra spirit from Lead Me Through Grace helps us reserve auras and prevents us from needing to buy it on equipment, making it a lot cheaper. These two act as essentially another damage link and help herald chaining by helping the heralds apply effects. Heralds cannot apply the effect that sets them off, i.e. Herald of Ice cannot freeze and Herald of Thunder cannot shock, but they can do other effects, and as such, these two really help them set each other off. I Shall Rage and Unbound Avatar do provide a lot of extra damage. I would recommend it if you can remember to use it. I can't, so I don't take it. Sunder My Enemies seems like a bit of a bait ascendancy point because you can find it on an amulet, and that amulet is not very expensive. And also, I felt like things really improved when I spec'd out of it and just into one of these damage nodes here. For Anoints, I would really recommend Doomsayer down here. It is very cheap. I find my build does not necessarily need it to do good chains. I have acceleration for the move speed and skill speed increase. It is fairly expensive, so I would not recommend it until very late. Pulling out. Okay. And here we have the skill page starting with Quarterstaff Strike. And in that we have concentrated effect because there doesn't seem to be a downside when it's used this way. Martial Tempo, which is pretty self-explanatory. Cold Infusion gives the cold damage to freeze bosses and rares. And Heft increases physical damage, but also cold damage at a proportional rate. And Close Combat gives a 25% more generic increase, which is great, but it does not reflect in the tooltip here. Still very noticeable in practice, though. Herald of Thunder, the links here aren't specific. You want damage, so I have Lightning Mastery, Lightning Penetration, and Lightning Infusion. What you do not want specifically is Elemental Focus, because it will stop it from chilling and helping chain Herald of Ice through Porcelkin. Shattering Palm, the important ones here are Ice Bite and Glaciation. It's a very nice movement skill. I would highly recommend it. These other ones are just generic damage increases that do not really affect it. It's still great as a 2 or 3 link skill. Ghost Dance restores energy shield based on evasion. The links here are not important. It recommends fast forward and seems to shorten the time between shrouds, so I use that. These other auras are nice to have if you have spare spirit, but you really want the base auras before you add anything else. Tempest Bell is great for bossing, good AoE clear. Super critical because it's getting hit a lot between charged staff, shockwaves, and the basic attack. More crits than most of my abilities. Overabundance lets you charge a second bell while the first is out. Execute will really help with finishing off bosses. And Heavy Swing, because it does not seem to have a downside here, and is the best place to get this damage into our build. Charge Staff is another button to press, but I was kind of hesitant to add it at first, but it really helps out a lot, and I don't notice it, and it's become a really background part of my playstyle that doesn't bother me. Persistence makes it last close to a minute with 5 power charges. Strip Away and Cold Exposure help with cold damage when we are extended fighting something like a boss or a rare. And Conduction gives it more chance to shock. And even if we are not doing a lot of lightning damage, it will still shock sometimes, and that is still a lot of damage added. Combat Frenzy gives us power charges through the Resonance Keystone. I have Vitality here, which is probably not as desirable as Cannibalism if you can only fit one, because Cannibalism recovers 4% of your max life on kill. Perfusion gives it a chance to produce another charge, and really the only place we'd want that, so here it goes. Wind Dancer gives a lot more evasion and gets another stage from quality, so quality that as soon as you can. It does a weapon attack for you when you are hit, which can really get you out of a sticky situation if you are stun locked. It can blow up a white mob or a shattering palm crystal and completely clear the screen for you. Herald of Ice really wants good damage links, probably some of your best ones, but mostly it wants magnified effect. Primal Armament seems to work here, and Cold Mastery is a solid damage increase. Grim Feast is the latest addition and probably a temporary one. I can't imagine it staying in its current form for long. It doubles our energy shield for no effort, just having the thing there. And if you have the int, there's no reason not to take this. Highly recommended. Hand of Chiula is technically in this unset ring over here, and is a helpful tool for bosses to freeze them faster and do a bit more damage. The skill list is pretty full. The unset ring is nice as a swap because my res is not quite outfitted for Porcelkin yet. And as far as Porcelkin is concerned, it's an important piece of gear, I would say, and it really helps clear, but the build will survive just fine without it. I didn't know about it until recently, and I started this build just fine, and I even posted a clip to Reddit that made the front page and made people really upset at the amount of clear it was doing without Herald of Ice and without Porcelkin. So with it, as you could see from the opening footage, it is devastating. So maybe it'll get nerfed, but even without it, the build still functions just fine, and this doesn't help with bossing at all, so I would not worry too much. Despite how it might look at first glance, the equipment for this build is actually very simple. The only required unique that most would say is a linchpin of the build is Pulsarkin, but I did not even know it existed until recently, and the build functions just fine without it, but you need to invest more heavily into Shattering Palm by boosting the plus melee levels in your build as high as possible. You'll see with this +4 on my staff, the damage will almost double. This makes the explosions, especially with magnified effect in it, extremely deadly and extremely good at proccing multiple Herald of Ice bursts. And the clear effect is very similar. I have been accused of using Herald of Ice and Pulsarkin when I wasn't, as I mentioned before, so there really is overlap in the utility there. The other uniques, Hand of Wisdom in Action and Raslatha's Coil, are things I am trying out to make bossing a bit smoother, but I would not actually recommend either of them because I do not have the stats to make Hand of Wisdom in Action worth it compared to good rare gloves. That would be way cheaper. And the minimum damage here, the penalty to it, I mean, it can really make mapping not as smooth because if you roll minimum damage, you're not going to kill the mob in one hit. So also not recommended. It evens out over enough attacks because you are getting 38% more of a much larger number and 37% less of a much smaller number. It is a net positive, but only if you attack the same thing enough times for it to average out. So the small hits we do repeatedly in a map don't benefit at all. The itemization strategy I would use is to get rare items for your non-porcelain ring slot and your amulet slot, your belt slot and your glove slot, and stack these with as much resistance and health as you can in order to sort of ignore those suffixes when you buy your helmet and chest, because being willing to accept bad suffixes means you'll be able to afford these good defensive numbers earlier, and that will really help with T15 survival. Our charm slot has a freeze charm in it, which is the only thing I would really recommend. If you get a second charm slot, I would put a slow charm there, and that would really, really be a huge quality of life increase. The unset ring is good to have as a swap because there's not really any auras I would want to give up, and putting Hand of Cholula in there lets me both even out my res and then use it on bosses because you don't need it the rest of the time. And Pulsarkin doesn't help with bosses at all. You may consider taking a penalty to defense and other modifiers to get high move speed, but I would say anything above 20% is good, 25% is excellent, and above that, you're really getting to luxury territory, and I would not try to buy an item like that. I found these. I would not even want to know how much they sell for. But you are going to benefit a lot more from not dying than you are from a lot of movement speed or even a lot of rarity. With the one shot in the map, survival is king when it comes to making money until you are confident enough to start sort of shedding defensive layers to add rarity. The weapon is extremely versatile. The T16 breach footage that ran for the first half of the video was taken with this item that I won out of Expedition from Gwenin directly before the video was taken. It's a pretty good staff. You'll notice that it is actually much lower damage than this almost equivalent fizz damage staff because the prefixes on this are not nearly as good. You'll see my DPS lower to just under 100,000. And then you have this, which is a similar situation. Even though there is huge fizz here, this is extremely good. Probably 20 plus divines to get one with this much fizz. You'll see when I equip it, my damage barely goes up for my auto attack. The main benefit is the herald damage, which is increased quite a bit. It does not benefit from attack speed, so your raw attack damage on your weapon is going to benefit herald the most. And that's why this build can function with a weapon like this, because the herald damage is a big part of clear, and anything past a few hundred DPS is going to be for bossing damage only. In fact, you can get away with very, very low fizz damage. As you can see here, the fizz damage is low, but because the suffixes are so great with the increased melee level damage and attack speed, it is going to be able to clear T15 reasonably well, even if our single target damage is going to suffer a bit. You'll notice there's no Porcelkin there, and also no boots, gloves, or helmet, because I don't have the int to run them, and I took the gloves off so they're not providing extra damage. And it is still reasonably able to clear T15 regular monsters, which is really what you need when you're starting out and you're trying to get your points ready. And that's how solid I think the base of this build is. You can use a very bad weapon and still get a lot out of it. The damage here is coming from Shattering Palm extra levels and the Herald overlap damage. I do not have much ES because of the no boots or helmet thing, but still is reasonably surviving. So obviously Porcelkin and having boots and gloves and a helmet is preferable, but even if you don't, you will still be able to get something done. And that's really the strength of this build, I think.